Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 54th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1981. Warren Beatty followed up his 1978 directorial debut Heaven Can Wait with a sweeping epic about Communist Party activist John Reed called Reds. While not necessarily a major box office hit, the film went on to earn 12 Oscar nominations, the most of any film since 1966. On Oscar night, it walked away with 3 awards, including one for Best Director, but Reds was shockingly beaten for Best Picture by a little British film that could, called Chariots of Fire. So why did Reds come up short in the end? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Reds. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today I have another returning guest, a great Gold Derby colleague of mine. You last heard him talking about the year 2007, where There Will Be Blood was the runner-up to No Country for Old Men, and now here he is talking about 1981, so many years earlier. Zach Laws.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking about, you mentioned the last time I was on was another one of those Hollywood epics that inexplicably lost Best Picture. So I've carved out a nice little niche for myself on this. I look forward to the Cleopatra year.
Yes, very good. Okay.
Although, spoiler alert, this one I won't have as many positive things to say about the winner as I did last time.
Yeah, that's to be expected. But yes, today we are talking about actually one of the more famous 80s races of them all, in which Reds was the runner-up, clear runner-up, I think, that lost Best Picture to a little underdog movie called Chariots of Fire. So let's talk about Reds. A quick summary. It is an epic historical docudrama about the life of John Reed, who goes by Jack in the film. He is a journalist who meets a socialite, Louise Bryant, with whom he has very passionate discussions about the state of America and the world and its ideals. And they fall in love, move in together, and Louise starts to become deeply entrenched in like the local scene of the radicals and the intellectuals, and also falls for this playwright, Eugene O'Neill. And we also meet this anarchist, Emma Goldman. And so eventually Jack becomes involved with the Communist Labor Party of America, and Louise goes off to work as a war correspondent, and ultimately they find this common interest in the famous Russian Revolution and the rise of the Bolsheviks. And so Jack becomes further invested in the cause of communism, publishes this book, 10 Days That Shook the World, and continues down his seemingly unwinnable path while also struggling to maintain his relationship with Louise. So the film was directed by Warren Beatty, who also co-wrote the original screenplay with Trevor Griffiths. It also stars Warren Beatty himself as Jack Reed, Diane Keaton as Louise, Jack Nicholson as Eugene O'Neill, Maureen Stapleton as Emma Goldman. We've got Edward Herman, Paul Sorvino, William Daniels, Gene Hackman, all-star cast. So Reds made $40 million at the US box office, was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, and won 3 of them, but curiously enough, not Best Picture. So, Zach, tell me your thoughts on Reds.
Well, just to age myself a little bit, I was born several years after this movie came out, so needless to say, I caught up with it many years after that as well. The first time I saw this movie was on one of those, for the kids out there used to be these things called VHS tapes. And for movies that were as long as this one was, they were divided up into 2 VHS tapes. So I picked that up from like my local video store and saw it
Oh,
that
video
way.
store.
Yes, another one of those things that that no longer exist for for those of you younger listeners. And this is you kind of the older I get, and the more times I return to this movie subsequently on DVD and then subsequently on Blu-ray, the richer it becomes for me. I think that it's in a category of those kinds of intellectual epics that people like David Lean used to make, where it's really long, it's really complex, it demands a lot of your attention, but ultimately the film is very rewarding when you give yourself over to it. Much like another movie we talked about, There Will Be Blood.
Hmm.
And so I absolutely love this film. I'm not usually a fan of the Oscars showering prizes on actors who turn to directors, but I think Warren Beatty really earned this one. And, it makes me wish he had directed more films, other than, I guess, the rules don't apply. So, but,
I don't even know what to say about that movie, but yes. So I very much agree. First of all, having watched it this week, I got the DVDs from my local library, and though they were also split into two
yep.
discs, which was very exciting for me. Like,
my Blu-ray is all one disc now, so I don't have to
right,
get up in the middle of it anymore.
right. But it's another one of these movies that has a great old intermission. So they don't quite make movies like that anymore. So, and really that's kind of a theme of how I feel about the film itself. It's very epic. It really takes its time, for good or for bad, depending on who you are, I guess. It's like 195 minutes, I think. So over 3 hours. But I did actually find myself constantly engaged throughout. And I think the film is really fittingly split into those first half and second half. And I do find more excitement from the first half, but I still found the emotional content and like the intellectual, the people turning, kind of not turning against each other, but having these really impassioned arguments about whether communism and socialism can work and how they sometimes turn into the things they are most against in some ways. I found that to be very intellectually stimulating, and it is a movie that you do have to kind of be constantly paying attention to and engaged with. Otherwise, you might get lost in exactly where we are and why Diane Keaton is like trekking through Europe, and
Yeah.
But I do think it's incredibly rewarding, and I think the performances actually are really fantastic from top to bottom, and it's no wonder that it gets 4 acting nominations here, which is Warren Beatty, Diane Keaton, Jack Nicholson, and Maureen Stapleton, and Maureen Stapleton ends up winning. I think they're all great. I think Diane Keaton is probably my best in show.
Yeah, I think one of the brilliant things that this movie does, which is a quality that it shares with things like Dr. Zhivago or Titanic later on, is that it puts at the center of this giant historical event a love story.
Exactly.
And a love triangle in this case. And, Diane Keaton, she's not just this object of romance for Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson. She is this fully fledged character. I mean, the movie is really kind of, I think when you say they don't make him like they used to, I think that this film really is sort of like a last remaining vestige of the cinema of the 1970s, and one of the ways in which it predates the Porky's era, which I think might have been this same year, come to think of it, is how much complexity and dimension Diane Keaton is given as Louise Bryant. I mean, she is somebody who, as Jack Nicholson says in one of the great lines of the movie, "What a heartbreaker you are," because she really is so in control of her own destiny. And it says a lot about, this movie takes place in the early 20th century, pre-suffragette movement, I believe. So you see a lot of the ways in which women were treated badly back then, and it puts it into the context of, you know, then contemporary life. And so, I mean, it's fantastic to see her fighting for what she believes in and not just being there as arm candy for the
Right.
men.
That's exactly right. And that's, before I had seen the film, I was like, okay, this is just about the Communist Party. It's about Jack Reed. It's going to be this big biopic where he just takes the center stage the whole time. But this is a real co-lead situation here. And there's even points in the first half where like Louise is like the driving force of the narrative.
Well, I think you have to give credit to Warren Beatty,
Yeah.
because I think that it's easy to look at this as just being a vanity project and that he wrote it, directed it, produced it, and starred in it. But I think the reason why you have so many acting nominations from this film is that he gives people like Diane Keaton and Jack Nicholson and Maureen Stapleton room to shine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that he's done in movies like Bonnie and Clyde before, which also got 5 acting nominations, or Heaven's Gate not Heaven's Gate, Heaven Can Wait. Heaven's Gate is another movie from this year. But yeah, I mean, he really does. And you mentioned all those other people in the cast who have these really juicy walk-on cameo roles. He's very generous in that way to his cast.
Exactly. And so as far as Keaton, like I think that's a character that really could get a bit muddled as far as what exactly she's thinking, how she's behaving, what she's really feeling about the relationships around her, or, all of the various systems that they're discussing throughout this film. But I think it's just so clear to me, I think, and that is a testament to Beatty's direction, that he gives her so much and that she is able to bring so much complexity out of the character. So yeah,
Yeah,
can't say enough about it.
Yeah, they were dating at the time when
Yes, they were.
and they broke up, I believe, because it was such a demanding shoot for the two of them. But I mean, I think that the performance that he got out of her is, I mean, it speaks for itself, really.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep. And as far as his own performance, I think it's very good. I don't think it's like completely Oscar winning worthy, because I think a lot of his performance is just, I mean, I think he devotes so much time to just directing the film itself that I don't know if it's always this totally dynamic character we have. Like I did find myself a lot more drawn to Diane Keaton and what she was going through, oddly enough, compared to him. But he certainly gets a lot in the second half of this film that, he definitely earns the nomination and all that. It's just, for me, it's not quite equal as far as
well,
that.
you're probably right about he was so focused on directing the movie that perhaps his own performance became secondary. I think that Warren Beatty always struck me as one of those people who, like Robert Redford or Paul Newman, kind of became a better actor the older that they got, because they were these like movie star handsome people. And so, of course, they would always get cast in, leading man roles. But the older they got and the more lines they got on their face, the better they became at acting. And you look at later Warren Beatty performances like Bugsy or Bulworth, and I think that, you're right. They are probably better than that. But I think that what he does here is, it's serviceable, I'll say.
Yes, it still works. It's still he plays into his very charming movie star-esque persona, where like you totally understand why someone like Louise Bryant or anyone around him would be so drawn to him, because he just has that natural magnetism that not everyone has, but also has kind of that dark edge to him where it's not like he's totally this sympathetic figure even at times. Like this character really goes down a narrow path,
That's a good point. And I think that so often in movies like this, ones that you've talked about on this show from other actor directors,
Sure.
it's very easy to make your character into a saint. And I think that he does uh, give himself some complexity. That's what makes it a more interesting performance than, say, I don't know, Mel Gibson in Braveheart, for
Sure.
instance, just to name another example.
Who literally makes himself into a Jesus figure
Yeah,
with
yeah.
every film.
He
Yeah,
doesn't. Yeah, Beatty doesn't. At least his. I guess we can do a little bit of a spoiler for this. If for people who haven't seen it, Jack Reed did die.
yeah. Spoilers for real life.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of subtlety in that. I mean, he's not kind of presenting himself as a martyr or a Christ figure or anything like that. I mean, it is, and it's more emotionally impactful that way. I think. There's a lot of subtlety in this movie
Yeah,
that I appreciate.
which I think maybe this is probably jumping ahead a bit, but with some audience members might not be able to pick up on that as much,
Right.
especially considering the length of the film as well. It's hard to like totally pay attention for 3+ hours,
Yeah,
even
exactly.
if you do have an intermission.
Yeah.
So, but as far as the other performances, I actually really love this Jack Nicholson performance.
Of all the Oscars this movie lost, that was one of the ones that hurt the most. I mean, I love John Gielgud and Arthur. I'm sure we'll talk about that later, and I'm so
Mhm.
glad that he won. But Nicholson in this movie, um, he was somebody who, like Beatty, was a leading man, but he was a leading man character actor,
Right.
and he had kind of a dry spell after winning the Oscar for Cuckoo's Nest.
Hmm.
And I think that with this movie and then terms of endearment later on, which he did win for, he got back on track and humbled himself and took a character role. I think uh, as a writer myself, Eugene O'Neill has always been a hero of mine and such a complex and interesting character. And I think that he doesn't necessarily look like Eugene O'Neill 100%, and
Right.
I'm not sure if he sounds like Eugene O'Neill, but I totally bought him as that kind of tortured writer, you
Yeah.
know, which is what O'Neill was. I mean, he was like the most serious man in the American theater.
Yeah.
Uh, so
And he certainly plays to that. And I mean, with Jack Nicholson, I think he's obviously one of the most phenomenal actors there's ever been, but sometimes he doesn't exactly disappear into roles.
yeah, yeah,
It's just Jack being Jack.
especially later on. I mean, it is interesting to see
Right.
him at this stage of his career really committing to, and he did this later on with About Schmidt, I think,
Yeah.
really just sort of allowing himself to disappear into a role. And Beatty does give him a lot of great material to work with. And I
Yes.
love that so much of the movie is devoted to his romance with Louise Bryant.
Hmm.
Like there's that fantastic scene where they're fighting and I mean the language in that is beautiful. You would expect it to be since he's a playwright. So just imagine having to write dialogue for Eugene O'Neill.
Yes.
But I mean that is like such a standout moment in the film, and I love that Beatty allowed that to happen. Like to take himself out of the drama for such a long period of time, and
Exactly.
yeah,
And he didn't have to,
no,
So
no, he could have
that's
been could have been in that scene somehow. So,
yeah. Yeah, I was really impressed with that, and I honestly I prefer it to his Terms of Endearment performance
oh, really? Yeah,
because I mean that's still very good and classic Jack, but again, it really feels like he's coasting a bit on his
mhm,
charms with Terms of Endearment, which is fine. He's obviously very charming, so it's
yeah.
hard to not fall back on that. But here, I feel like he really stretches and is very serious
Mhm.
and sharp and incisive. It's a great performance. But the one Oscar-winning performance we have here is Maureen Stapleton.
Yes, and I mean, you have to think about this was her. I can't remember how many nominations she had had before that. Do you have that in front
This
of you?
was her fourth nomination.
Thank you. Yeah, I
So,
remember. Yeah, she had Interiors
mhm,
right before that, and Lonely Hearts, and one more. Um, so she was way overdue at that point,
yep,
and she doesn't have a lot of scenes in the movie, but the scenes that
Right.
she has are so memorable, and she's so animated as Emma Goldman, who is also a character in another movie from this year that I'm sure we'll talk about later. But
Yeah.
you know, it's such a, again, a rich supporting role. But it is surprising that of all the actors who won, she was the one.
I mean, sometimes it's just the nature of the category, the competition, things like that.
Yeah, I have to imagine that of her competition, the only one that was really giving her any heat was Jane Fonda and On the
Right.
Golden Pond, and she
Give
had
it a
just
very,
won 2 Oscars, and
yeah.
yeah,
I don't think they wanted to do it so suddenly, give her 3 Oscars. I mean, it's a
right.
very sympathetic story, but we're all getting ahead of ourselves. There's just so much juicy stuff happening in this year.
There is, yeah.
But let's just talk about the story itself. Like I said, it's a long movie. I want to figure out basically if this was the right concise way of telling this story. Because another thing we have in this film is documentary footage.
Yeah, and I remember the first time I saw that movie, I thought, what a bold, interesting idea.
Yeah.
Because it's not a story that I think a lot of people are familiar with. Certainly I wasn't familiar with it when
Yeah,
I
me
saw it.
neither.
And I'm sure that like 90% of the people on the planet right now are not. Um, but it almost works as narration, which I'm not a huge fan of narration in most movies, because usually they kind of just tell you what you're looking at already. But in this case, it really does help to a give you information in a concise way, and b put the movie within a historical context. You
Yeah.
know, I think that it really does. Uh, it's a really effective way of packing information into the movie.
Yeah. And oddly enough, it helps it to break things up a bit more so it's not totally like you feel the length of this film,
Yeah,
you know?
you
So,
know, apparently, that was not in the way they shot it with the black backgrounds. That was not intended to be that way. They shot it that way, and their intention was to apparently put footage behind these survivors.
uh,
Not survivors. These
they're called
witnesses.
witnesses.
Witnesses. Thank you.
Yes.
My God.
Well,
They
they've
they
survived.
they have
They're
survived. Yeah,
elderly.
they have survived many diseases and near misses. But
Yeah,
apparently, when Beatty looked at the footage unedited, he thought, "Oh, well, that looks really good." And
and it does.
yeah,
It's very dark and very interesting compositions.
hmm
And we should mention, I feel like we didn't even like talk about what the footage really is of the documentary stuff, but
yeah,
it's just interviews with a lot of older folks who actually had encountered Jack and Louise and this group of associates, whatever you want to call them,
right, right.
at the time, and had literally firsthand knowledge of the perceptions of Louise, which
Mhm.
is kind of a funny little motif throughout, and Jack and everyone really. And there's this one great moment where one of the witnesses is like singing a song, and
Yeah, yeah.
they have like an underscoring of that very song throughout the film.
Well, yeah, I mean, the music in this movie was composed by Stephen Sondheim, and
Yeah.
the name of that song is like "Won't You Play in My Backyard" or something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he like used that as a way of to convey emotion in the movie, an emotional turning point in the movie, and you'll kind of hear echoes of that at points. I mean, they use a lot of like ragtime music, and he kind of riffs on that, and it really works to, again, like help put you in the period.
I do think it works.
Hmm.
I think that's definitely a calculated risk that could have just really distracted from the narrative.
Yeah,
But somehow he kind of just makes it all work very seamlessly, and I think that's a credit to the editing as well.
yeah, that was the great D.D. Allen, right, who edited this movie?
Yes, Dede
Yes,
Allen and Craig
yeah,
McKay.
yeah. Craig McKay, yes, that's right.
Mhm.
Dee Allen, she was all the way back on Bonnie and Clyde. That's how long back they went. And then, of course,
Yeah,
Craig McKay went on to become a great film editor as well.
yeah. So I actually wanted to talk a little bit more about the editing, which
Hmm.
I think the first half of this film, like I said, it's a little more fast paced.
Hmm.
And I think that is intentional.
Hmm.
I don't know if I'm reading too much into it.
Well, no, I mean, I think I would have to find some kind of interview with them to see if that is was their intention. But I mean, I think
Right.
that it does work to. I think that when you have a long movie like that, it's probably a good idea to sort of get the audience invested early on, so that when you do have to slow things down in the second half, you've already got them. You
Right.
know, so that probably was a calculated move on their part.
For sure. And I think the reason for that is I really think it's just giving Louise and really the audience through Louise this getting wrapped up in this new bohemian sort of community that she's become a part of, and
Hmm.
really just getting into the whirlwind of this crazy radical world. I think
Hmm.
that's a really good way of showing that without telling too much.
That sort of weirdly reminds me of a totally different movie, but another one you talked about on your show, Goodfellas.
Yeah, sure.
Similar kind of editing technique where, and for the audience as well. I mean, you are getting swept away in this world, and then I think that when in the second half things need to slow down because the narrative dictates that.
Hmm.
It's a very effective filmmaking technique.
Yeah.
I think a lot of long movies seem to do that. I'm thinking about like Malcolm X is another one with a really fast-paced first hour, and then things start to slow down a little bit. And Lawrence of Arabia is that way. So I mean, it's definitely I don't know. Maybe it's just a little unwritten code of 2.5 to 3 hour movies.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think the second half is really a lot about Jack and everyone starting to put all of their ideas into action.
Hmm.
And a lot of that is, especially Jack discovering that this isn't just going to happen overnight. We're not going to
Hmm.
make these sweeping changes to America or Russia or wherever. So, dealing with like the bureaucrats and how all of those scenes are so long and drawn out.
The
I
way it
think
is in Washington.
exactly. And I think that's very fitting of exactly how they're feeling,
Hmm.
which is another testament to his direction that he's, able to convey that
Yeah,
without actively saying it too
yeah.
much.
Putting the audience in the shoes of its lead character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But we do get a really one of the best scenes in the movie, very late into the film between Jack and Emma.
Hmm.
I'm sure you probably know what I'm talking about here, where they've met up. They have these conflicting ideas about the state of Russia.
Hmm.
She's wondering about how the Reds are conducting themselves, considering like how they terrorize as much as those that they were originally striking against, all that.
Hmm.
And the masses are still struggling. Everyone still has this struggle. And meanwhile, you have Jack who's arguing like, it's all about the fight. It's all about just going to battle. And we're not just going to resolve this over tea.
Yeah, and I mean, there you have the great failing of communism, or
Yeah.
or honestly, I mean, any kind of radical idea that politicians come up with. There's
Hmm.
always some kind of disconnect between the idealism and the actual execution of it. And also the what power does to people who are suddenly placed into it. And so, I mean, it all really is summed up pretty nicely in that scene.
Yeah. It's just a very complex idea that they're
Mhm.
trying to convey. And they do have a lot of time to do so. But I think it's perfectly encapsulated in that one scene right there.
Mhm.
As far as other thoughts on the film, I think the ending is something that could have been really botched or made kind of cliche
Yep.
because he does die. Spoilers for real life again. But, I think it could have been like this melodramatic thing where Louise is throwing himself on
Yeah.
on him or, whatever the case may be. But I think it's really like weirdly bittersweet but very fitting that
It
it's
work
just the two of them in that one shot.
it works on an emotional level. I mean, it
Yeah.
really does.
Hmm.
Because by that point you have grown to care about the two of them. And I mean, I don't need snot coming out of Diane Keaton's nose and all of that in order to feel that she's lost the love of her life. I think that, good acting actually does convey things in very subtle ways.
Yep.
So I agree with you. I think, the ending is just about perfect.
Yeah. And ultimately, it gives me the same feeling that Bugsy gave
Hmm.
me sometimes, speaking of Warren Beatty and films we've talked about on this show,
Hmm.
because it's just this film that's about people who are very complex, who are sometimes or often unlikable
Hmm.
or narrow-minded, or, people who in your situation you wouldn't do what they do or things like that.
Hmm.
But they are just so compelling nonetheless. And sometimes they're inspirational in their goals, but it's a lot more complicated than a lot of the other Best Picture nominees in this particular race, especially.
Well, I mean, you go all the way back to the beginning of his career with Bonnie and Clyde, and
Yeah,
you're
for
talking
sure.
about people who were bank robbers. So, yes, I would not do what they do in that situation, but you really do feel an emotional devastation when they're eventually when their downfall happens or their demise.
Yeah,
So I mean, obviously, I think it's something that he's done very well in his career, and I think there was that Howard Hughes movie that he did, which wasn't a total disaster, but you can understand like why he would have been drawn to a movie about somebody like Howard Hughes.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's a very complex film. It is a long film. You do have to pay attention. You have to sit yourself down and really get yourself immersed in this film,
yeah,
which, that's not always the best picture winner type
yeah.
of film, but I do think it's absolutely worth it 37 years later.
I agree, and I will say, of the 3 Oscars that it won, the one thing that we haven't talked about yet was the cinematography by Vittorio Storaro,
Yes.
who's a 3-time Oscar winner,
Hmm.
and I think that part of what makes this movie so compelling is, the imagery that he evokes, and it's very simple. You'll notice, like, there's not a lot of camera movement, a lot of
Yeah,
unnecessary movement, and I think, there's rarely a dolly shot in the film. But it's so fitting for the story that they're telling, and Diane Keaton has never been more lovingly photographed.
that absolutely, totally
Yeah,
agree on that.
and I mean,
Um,
for a movie titled Reds, you got to get the guy who knows how to use color.
yes, logically, yes.
Yeah.
All right, so I mean, I don't know if the film is really still talked about as much anymore.
Hmm.
It's I don't see a lot of discussion about Reds all these years later, but it's absolutely something worth watching again because I do think it's his best film by a mile. And so,
Yeah. Well, thank God for home video. I mean,
yeah.
still keeping it out there, and it took a long time for this one to come out on DVD. I remember,
Mhm.
for the reason I think you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, I think that when people sit themselves down and give it a chance, it's richly rewarding.
So when we come back, we will be discussing why a big epic like Reds was not able to win Best Picture because it lost to a little movie called Chariots of Fire.
Jack dreams that he can hustle the American working man, whose one dream is to be rich enough not to have to work, into a revolution led by his party.
Is the Socialist Party prepared to take a position on the draft or not?
And you dream that if you discuss the revolution with a man before you go to bed with him, it'll be missionary work rather than sex.
Where are you going? You're not going any.
Get out of my body!
The officer, these men have the legal right to assemble.
What the hell are you doing?
Me? I write.
You right?
Huh?
You wrong.
I'd rather be with a fighter who wants to change the world than a critic who wants to mourn it.
Well, the place to be now is Russia.
You don't have to tell me what's happening in Russia. I read the papers.
Well, come with me.
Support you and we'll join you in revolution. Revolution is dissent. Always. You don't rewrite what I write.
And we're back. So now we'll be talking about why Reds lost Best Picture to Chariots of Fire. Reds was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, huge total, including Best Picture, Best Director for Warren Beatty, Best Actor for Warren Beatty, Best Actress for Diane Keaton, Best Supporting Actor for Jack Nicholson, Best Supporting Actress for Maureen Stapleton, Best Original Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound. And it walked away with 3 of those. Best Director for Beatty, Best Supporting Actress for Stapleton, and Best Cinematography. Solid ratio there. Reds won the DGA before the Oscars, as well as a WGA for Original Screenplay, plus the New York Film Critics also gave it their Best Picture prize. Meanwhile, Chariots of Fire won at BAFTA, and it actually tied with Reds at the National Board of Review. So it's kind of interesting.
Yep, to say the least.
Yeah. So this is a very famous year in which we actually have a split, which is not often the case in the 80s. So let's talk about why this happened, why the Academy kind of sort of rejected Reds in a big way.
Well, it's weird because just to compare it to, because it's fresh on my mind, I watched this movie again recently, Lawrence of Arabia, and David Lean movies. Those are the kinds of big, complex, long, intellectual epics that the Academy had no problem rewarding in the past. Mm-hmm. And certainly, the very next year, Gandhi won, Out of Africa, Amadeus, all those things. So they have no problem rewarding long, gargantuan movies. So I think that you have to really look at it in the context of its politics and the times. You look at what's happening today in recent elections, where you have people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez running unabashedly as self-proclaimed democratic socialists. And, I lean very left on the political spectrum, and I agree with all of those policies. But God help you if you try to explain to someone who grew up during the Cold War or is a conservative the differences between democratic socialism and communism. And if it's that way today, just imagine what it was like back then when the Soviet Union was still around and kicking, and we had just elected Ronald Reagan. Yep, with his shining city on the hill BS. And I, as somebody who lives and works in Hollywood, it's not as liberal as people think it is. Certainly there's a lot of people who are outspoken in their liberalism, but there's just as many conservatives in this town. And you have to imagine there must have been a few more back then with the kind of like old Hollywood guard still around.
I think that's a very solid argument, and it's certainly a unique argument that we haven't necessarily made on this show, but I think is very important to this particular race. Mm-hmm.
If you look at all the movies that won in the 1980s, we're right at the beginning here, so there's very few exceptions, like Ordinary People, which I'm sure you'll talk about next week,
Mhm.
is an exception to this. Um, but the films that started winning in this decade were feel good movies,
Yeah.
and I think that the mood of the era with Reagan in the White House and the age of me and the age of yuppies and all that stuff, it really had an impact on Oscar voters.
Yeah. It was an interesting kind of reflection from the 70s, which had a lot of like the really bold, audacious filmmakers and films, and some of them were even awarded at the Oscars. So
Yeah.
it's interesting how the 80s really were like swinging all the way to the other end as far as just feel good, traditional, nice, big epics.
If Reds had come out just a couple years earlier, I think it would have won Best Picture without contest. The era of The Deer Hunter and The Godfather, and I mean, even like French Connection, or even
Sure.
just, it's not a dark movie per se, but Annie Hall is, much more kind of in keeping with that spirit
Yeah.
of, like iconoclastic countercultural filmmaking.
And also Diane Keaton.
Yeah, exactly. So,
So-
yeah, I had Diane Keaton on the brain back then. I mean,
Yeah.
my God, like 3 movies that woman was in the 1970s, won Best Picture.
Yeah, she was a
So,
lucky charm
yeah, if only.
until it stopped.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think as far as Chariots of Fire, I don't love the film. I'm just gonna
I
say that.
yeah. Uh, Usually with most of these Best Picture winners, I can make an argument for why they would have won, and
Sure.
most of them I rather enjoy. This is not one of them.
Mm,
And it's not like I have a huge personal affinity for Reds. I love the movie, but it's not like how could this have lost? It's more like how did Chariots of Fire win?
yeah,
Because it's not. Uh, I guess maybe you had to be alive back then to understand the impact of this movie, because I've seen it a couple of times trying to understand it, and I've never gotten it.
trying to
I've just
crack the code.
Yeah, I've just
Yeah.
trying to, I mean, it is, you know, when it came out, it was one of those movies like Slumdog Millionaire, like The King's Speech, that captured people's hearts and
Mhm.
left them cheering. I can understand why people would cheer after like Slumdog Millionaire or The King's Speech, and Harvey was thinking about that movie when he bought The King's Speech, but I just, it's all these like snooty British people, uh, you know, set to some like funky Vangelis music.
Some 80s synths.
Yeah, I mean,
Perfect for the 20s
yeah. I,
Britain.
I guess it had a lot to do with the fact that, it's sort of about anti-Semitism,
Mm.
but not really.
It kind of has a point, but isn't that confrontational about it at all.
Yeah, I mean, the Christian guy is who ends up winning. I guess,
Yeah.
yeah. For anybody who hasn't seen Chariots of Fire, it's about this one runner who's running for God and for Jesus, and another runner who's running for Judaism, I suppose.
Sure.
Or,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Pretty
the
much.
basic. That's what I understand it to be, and I've seen the movie. I can't really. I like.
It doesn't go much beyond that, really.
Yeah, it's like I know Ian Holm got a supporting actor nomination for it, but I can't for the life of me remember much of what he did in the movie.
Me neither.
Yeah,
And I just watched it this week.
I know.
So,
And I love Ian Holm. He's a great actor, but
yeah.
I'm like, really, this was the okay.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I really think this is probably just a case of Reds was this big movie that people were like, okay, this is obviously the front runner. It has all these technical elements to it. It has this actor turned director making his big splashy, I guess this is a sophomore, not really a debut, but
Yeah.
regardless. And I think when they saw the movie, they didn't necessarily fall in love in a way that they might have with
Yeah.
Chariots of Fire, where it's, I guess, a little more emotional. It's a little more sentimental. It is just this simple story that people can very easily just watch it and understand it and be done with it and be like, that made me feel good. They did it for God.
Yeah, it's that whole like, just to talk about the King's Speech again. I remember that movie, the line that Harvey came up with for it was the movie that makes you feel.
Yep.
And it was like that versus The Social Network, and very much like the movie for your heart versus the movie for your mind.
Yes.
And
so anti-intellectual.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that common man bullshit, the elites versus every other person.
Wouldn't you want to have a beer with the Chariots of Fire?
And the other, it's sort of inexplicable too, because I think, why would you want to have a beer with the Chariots? Like, I think looking at the 5 films that were nominated that year, if they were going to go for like the sentimental, emotional pick, you think it would be On Golden Pond, because at least that's something that is relatable to people. We all understand what it means to get older. We all understand what it means to have to deal with our parents and children. It's like it's sappy and saccharine, but it does get at the heart of some universal truths. Whereas Chariots of Fire, I really don't understand what people see in it. I think maybe, when I used to work at this movie theater in North Carolina, it was an art house theater, and we had these thing called Manor movies. It was called The Manor. And it was always like movies about British history that, little old ladies and their husbands would come to see on Sunday afternoons. And, they would get off on the costumes and the jewelry and the royalty and all that kind of stuff. And I guess Chariots of Fire sort of scratches that itch that people in this country oddly have to just watch upper class people exist.
Yes.
Yeah, and
like a little escapist fare.
Yeah, I guess that's what
in
it
its
is.
own way,
Yeah. It'd be one thing if the guy who was the actual underdog of the movie won, but he doesn't.
But it's not even that.
Yeah.
That's where I thought it was leading towards. I'm like, okay, well, this makes sense. But then it's like, okay, it's just the Christian.
And I honestly, like, none of the characters in the movie I identify with at all.
Yeah.
It looks kind of nice. Hugh Hudson, the guy who directed it, he was a British commercial director. And
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah, he worked at the same time as like Ridley Scott and Alan Parker, people like that, that kind of. But like of all those filmmakers, he's like by far the least interesting. Like that's not even a contest.
Yeah, it's also interesting that he doesn't win Best Director here.
Yeah, didn't win. Did he win any awards for directing? I can't think of any. Maybe
No.
like he didn't even win at BAFTA, did he?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I think Louis Malle won for
Atlantic City. Right, exactly.
Which is just, it's like Tom Hooper losing the BAFTA for King's Speech. You're just like, wow, even BAFTA. That won Best Film at BAFTA too, didn't it? It was.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so weird.
I totally agree with what you're saying about On Golden Pond. That movie came in with 10 nominations. For a movie like On Golden Pond to get 10 nominations, including, correct me if I'm wrong, Best Sound.
Yeah, Best Sound for, all that Henry Fonda saying he's going to suck face with Katharine Hepburn.
And the loons.
Well, that movie too was like that was a huge hit. I think it was like.
It was a monster hit. It was number 2.
Yeah, which is insane to think about, behind Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It was an event film.
And it also had like an Oscar story behind it because, it had, you had these 2 old Hollywood veterans in it, Henry Fonda and Katharine Hepburn. Jane Fonda optioned this play because she wanted to win her father an Oscar and she wanted to make a movie with him before he died. And, you watch that movie, and as over the top and sentimental as it is, the scenes between the 2 of them feel almost real,
They are.
And it had such a great narrative behind it, and you could make a case that it was the runner-up this year because it won 2 acting awards and a writing prize.
Yeah.
So, it's odd to me that they wouldn't go for that. If you're not going to go, I can understand them not going with Reds, but I can't understand them going with Chariots of Fire when they have On Golden Pond right there.
Right.
You know, right there. Like
It's sitting right there.
It seems so obvious.
Yes.
You know?
And there's so many like older folks in the Academy who could probably so easily relate to Henry Fonda and Katharine Hepburn. And those that aren't older can relate to Jane Fonda and dealing with her parents. So like,
and it's even got that little kid in there too. What was
exactly
that? The one who says "suck face," the loons.
Yes. What a film.
Yeah.
But going back to Reds versus Chariots of Fire, I really just think it comes down to them really starting to get into this mode of this is the movie that makes us feel emotional and arouses any sort of emotion out of us. Whereas I think Reds, and this is more of a credit to it than it sounds, but it doesn't play to that emotional sentiment as much. It still has a very passionate love story at the center, which is something that people can glom onto if they're not into all the commie stuff. But like, it doesn't give them that easy emotional response, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that I hear over and over and over again. Every single film that wins Best Picture, without exception, is something that makes me feel good. And sometimes, I mean, they go for something like Moonlight, which is very emotional, but it's not necessarily feel good emotion until like the very end of the film. Or something like Spotlight, which is more muted emotion, but you still feel like, these are heroic people. Over and over again, it's just that same kind of, I feel something from this. And I think that you do get into an error more often than not where the wrong film wins because of that.
Yep.
I wish that they were a little more reflective and thought about this a little bit more, other than just like, that's the movie that I really liked.
This was cute. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And God only knows what that movie is going to be this year.
Right. Yeah. We're in the middle of those discussions right now.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because they're, as far as the awards that Chariots of Fire won before Best Picture, the fact that it wins costume design, Chariots of Fire.
And it's all these people running in their underwear.
Yeah. It's just like white tracksuits. Like, what is that? I mean, you have Reds, you have Ragtime, you have French Lieutenant's Woman, all very flashy costumes there. But
Pennies from Heaven.
Yeah,
Bob Mackie.
All of them are. Yeah, all of them are.
Yeah. I mean, it's apparently Warren Beatty said that when Chariots of Fire won costume design, he knew he was going to lose Best Picture.
Yeah, that's what I read.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, it's really I'm trying to think of a recent example where it was just like but when you're sitting there on Oscar night and you see something, when you see a film lose something that it's supposed to win, then you know that movie is in trouble.
Yeah. That's the argument people had in the La La Land year where like it lost sound mixing, it lost film editing. And people are like, "What's happening?"
Yeah, I remember
sitting there. Win, but also, this isn't a sweep. What's going on?
Yeah, I remember I had that exact same thought. It's like, oh my God, it's going to lose.
Yeah,
I'll be, and then it didn't for a moment, but
right. But we've certainly covered that.
Yeah. Yes, we have.
Everyone has, not just this show. But,
yeah.
I wanted to get to some other films in this race, this Best Picture race, particularly on Golden Pond, since we talked about it quite a bit. Yeah, I agree with you that you could actually make a case that it could have been a runner-up because of how emotional it is and resonant, and the fact that it has 10 nominations.
And they really loved it. I mean, I can understand why Henry Fonda won.
Yeah.
Because he had never won before. They gave him an honorary prize because they thought they were never going to have an opportunity to ever again. And I mean, the whole reason for that movie existing, we see this with like Still Alice and Julianne Moore, or perhaps this year with The Wife and Glenn Close. It's a movie that is designed to win its lead actor an overdue Oscar.
Pretty much.
So I understand why that happened. If you look at like Katharine Hepburn winning Best Actress over Diane Keaton, over Meryl Streep in The French Lieutenant's Woman, another fantastic movie. Over
Yeah.
Susan Sarandon in Atlantic City. Marsha Mason, I guess it's good.
Probably fifth.
Yeah. Oh, that was one of those awful movies she made with Neil Simon one of those awful Neil Simon dramas. But like you have to think that On Golden Pond had to be popular with them for her to beat out those three performances.
Yeah, and like there wasn't any urgency to that win. Like,
no, there was not.
That was her fourth,
and she wasn't going to show up to get it anyway. So right. I mean, like,
so what is the incentive there, really? Other than just respect for the film and her, I guess, you know.
We love the movie and we love the two of them. I mean, that's what it was. The two of them together. It was this great kind of. It was like the last grasp of old Hollywood.
It really is that slot this year, where it's like the old here, very, very old in many ways. Traditional, elderly protagonists, which honestly we don't really even get that much anymore at all in Hollywood or the Oscars. And you know, combining that with the new, I guess you could say Reds is a bit of a combining of the old and new, but also Warren Beatty was kind of a newer figure.
They were a part of that new Hollywood revolution, you know. I mean, it was I guess and them and like Atlantic City, I think you can Atlantic City is really the one that I think you can say straddles the line, because it literally has Burt Lancaster in it and Susan Sarandon.
Yeah.
So I think like
that's true. Yeah, it's really interesting how well this movie does. It also wins the Golden Globe for Best Picture Drama.
That's right. Yeah.
Over Reds, for that matter.
And Chariots of Fire. I mean, maybe people were thinking that was going to win.
Well, Chariots of Fire was in the Best Foreign Film category.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they do have that weird. They're the Hollywood Foreign Press. Why the hell do they have like? They don't allow foreign films to be nominated.
It's a very bizarre, weird, like self-sabotaging rule, but regardless, I think I was reading a lot about how like on Golden Pond and Reds, it was like the two of them are gonna duke it out.
Yeah. I mean,
like it's not gonna be this little independent like British film.
You had to think that probably worked in Chariots of Fire's favor. I mean, so often part of the reason why the King's Speech won was that for the longest time it was The Social Network, and you know that was sort of, you know, it's the second place movie. Oh, I really do love it, and then all of a sudden it just that helps a film. It really does.
Yeah, you know? It was just that little underdog that people love to support. Yeah,
exactly.
But as far as On Golden Pond, my own thoughts, I actually think it's a very affecting film. I can definitely see where some people could be like, this is very cheesy, this is sentimental, this is just like for older people, how can I relate to this, whatever. But I do think it's just all of these great actors kind of at their best, just, you know, working with pretty weighty, emotional, familial material, and that little X factor that there is between the two Fondas, where in real life Jane Fonda has this strained relationship with her father Henry, and it's really like the two of them working this out on screen, you know, on set, and you can see why it was such an emotional experience for her and for him as well. So, you know, I think, and also, you know, Katharine Hepburn is also a good anchor for the film as well, and she's very funny. She has cool, like that little speech that's very emotional about go go go, you know, and she's always screaming about the loons. It's almost a comedic performance in some ways, but it's also very like heartwarming, and
it works.
It's a film that works for me. It's some of it's dated, the music is very dated, but
I tell you, nothing will date a movie quite like music.
And, especially in the 80s, which I've discovered.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, the movie does work. Like it gets at those essential things that we all can relate to, and it helps that the acting is so good.
Yeah,
there's a reason why that play continues to be performed in like regional theater houses, you know, because it is something that's very easy to grasp onto, I think.
Yep, and very juicy roles.
Yeah.
We did get a Twitter question about Henry Fonda's win.
Okay.
This is from John Gouveia, who said, if Henry Fonda didn't have the overwhelming sentimental support, who would have taken Best Actor? My guess is Dudley Moore.
Really?
That's what this person says. That's not me speaking.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, this could be a nice segue into another movie that I've wanted to talk about that was also nominated this year for Best Picture. I think that Burt Lancaster would have won for Atlantic City. He won the critics' prizes. He won it BAFTA as well, right? Correct me if I'm...
I think so, yeah.
And
the BAFTAs loved Atlantic City.
Yeah, and it's probably my personal favorite of the 5 Best Picture nominees.
Wow.
It's a really small scale drama, and that's all about this small time hustler, who kind of takes this last grasp at relevancy. And Burt Lancaster, I think, it's hard to say this is the performance of his career because he had so many great performances like Elmer Gantry and
which
Sweet
you
Smell.
kind of won for,
Yeah. This one is like, this one is pretty close, like you feel the sort of the yearning to have done more with your life, and I think that for him to have done such an adventurous performance that late in his life, it speaks volumes about the kind of actor that he was throughout his career. And I mean, I love everything about that movie too. I love the script. I love Louis Malle's direction. I love Susan Sarandon's performance. I know that a lot of people probably love that scene with the lemons. Just to,
yes.
But yeah, I think that if I had to guess, I would say that he would have been the obvious alternative.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's certainly the critics' choice. It's the cool choice in comparison to Henry Fonda, and obviously he did sweep the critics. As far as the Dudley Moore thing, he did win the Golden Globe for a comedy musical because he didn't really have any of this other competition to deal with.
No,
so
he did not.
That helps out a bit. But yeah, I definitely think Burt Lancaster was certainly the respected actor who's making this really big award-worthy comeback. And yeah, he had already won, so again, not as much urgency, but I guess they don't care about that in this particular year when we have Katharine Hepburn winning her 4th.
Well, I mean, it's important to remember too. It had been like 21 years between Elmer Gantry.
That is true.
It was akin to like this last year we saw with Frances McDormand winning for 3 Billboards. So I think that enough time had passed for them to, want to give him a second. But I think that, the Henry Fonda thing, it was just, and I'm not going to take away Henry Fonda's Oscar. I wish he had won it for Grapes of Wrath.
Oh yeah.
Like he should have so long ago. But
Angry Men.
Yeah. But I want to say, just to speak in his defense, it's not a, I don't think that it's just simply a, here you go, gold watch win. I think that he did earn that Oscar. It's a great performance. It's a very memorable performance. So I don't begrudge him that.
Yeah, I probably would have voted for him. I mean, I do really respect Burt Lancaster in that performance. It is subtle, and I understand why it might not be as flashy to a wide group of Oscar voters, because he doesn't really have big, loud speeches and things like that. Where he's like proclaiming everything about his daughter, that Henry Fonda has in spades, like in every single scene is like an acting reel for him. So I understand it, but I think he's the clear choice for the alternative. Maybe even to, again, bring it back to last year, similar to like a Sam Rockwell winning over Willem Dafoe, where Sam Rockwell has a lot more of a flashy role compared to Willem Dafoe, who is very subtle, but a lot of people in the critics circles anyway really respected that performance. So
I think also, I mean, Atlantic City is a much tougher movie. I mean, like it's Louis Malle was this French auteur who came up during the new wave. And I mean, the way that he presents Atlantic City, it's almost like a decaying metropolis. I mean, it's kind of grim in that way. But I love there's a great amount of fun that he has in that movie as well. And a lot of it does stem from Lancaster's performance. Like you can kind of feel there's a joy of performance in that. It's very subtle, but you can kind of detect how much fun he's having this rich of a role this late in his career.
Mm-hmm. You can feel the lines on his face, but he's still himself, and he's still but going to Susan Sarandon, the other half of Atlantic City, we got a few questions about Susan Sarandon.
Oh boy.
This is from Ortiz Castro, who said Susan Sarandon apparently voted for herself in supporting. Do you think she belonged in that category or in lead, where she was indeed nominated?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think she is the female lead of the movie. And I think that it's actually, I mean, it's a shame that Kate Reid from that same movie didn't manage to get nominated in supporting, because she is, I think, the clear supporting performance. She probably, if Susan had been nominated in supporting, she might have actually won, or at least had a better chance of winning, because the competition in lead was a little thicker. But I think she's in the right category. I think Susan Sarandon was expressing a little bit of false modesty there.
Yeah.
So.
I think she's like very clearly a lead, and there's like no discussion to be had that she's supporting. I really think that that's kind of ridiculous if she had actually been placed in supporting. I know that's a thing that happens in Oscar history where younger performers or newer performers, which we have to admit, Susan Sarandon was very new in this particular time. So you can understand why you would default to supporting, but she's very much the lead of the film. So
she was the ingenue of this category, I suppose. Even though
she was,
her and Diane Keaton are the same age, actually. But I guess there was,
Well, Diane Keaton had the the gravitas.
He had an Oscar already, and
yeah. So the other Susan Sarandon question we got, kind of sort of, was from Juan Carlos Ollano, who said, according to what I've read online, Susan Sarandon was a shocker Best Actress nom. Which actress is most probably number 6 in the votes?
Well, I'll tell you, I think if there was somebody who should have been nominated and over Marsha Mason, it was Kathleen Turner in Body Heat. I'm not quite sure if she was the clear 6th choice, but just kind of looking at the movies, that the prominent films that were out at that time, I think that there was probably, she certainly was somebody who, with that film, was the hot young thing, and that movie was so great and so widely respected. So I have to suspect that she came very close to getting nominated. She was nominated at the Golden Globes in the I think, right?
Yeah, in the New
It
Star.
was New Star of the Year. Yeah.
So kind of, but
that stupid thing.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Another outdated Golden Globes thing.
I was just looking at the IMDb page now. I was like, oh yeah, she got it. But I have to suspect she would have been the clear 6th choice.
Sure, I could definitely see that. I would also throw out Sally Field in Absence of Malice as a possibility.
Yeah.
So that film got a fair amount of nominations. She got a Golden Globe nomination. She is who she is,
Yeah, Sally Field probably had a better shot.
There's also Bernadette Peters, possibly for Pennies from Heaven, who gets a Golden Globe win in comedy musical actress. So there's a few possibilities. Hard to say, but Susan Sarandon is actually a little bit of a surprise nomination when you consider that she didn't really get too many precursors. So
yeah, you're right. I mean, she wasn't at the Golden Globes, right?
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, so I mean, she had to have been kind of a shock. I guess that just shows how much they liked that movie. Not
enough to give it a win, but
right. At least certain people in the Academy. It's one of those movies. It was probably so widely respected that it had no chance at all of winning a single Oscar.
Yeah.
Um,
Like Lady Bird.
yeah, exactly, like Lady
Mm.
Bird.
We're just relating everything to 2017.
Exactly, yeah. Well, we have to, we gotta, these things inform the years later, so.
Exactly.
Oh.
So the other film is a little baby film called Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Which is our colleague Chris Beecham's favorite movie of all time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it's fantastic. I mean, it's one of the best blockbusters that's ever been created, one of the most influential ones that people are still trying to ape off of, like how this movie got to be so great and so successful and so beloved and so immediately classic.
When people make an argument for things like Black Panther, getting into Best Picture, a movie like Raiders of the Lost Ark is proof positive that those kinds of blockbusters can and oftentimes should be rewarded with nominations. I mean, it was such an influential film and such an iconic film, even back when it came out. I mean, it really affected the way that the kinds of Halloween costumes that people wore. And I think that what's so extraordinary about it too is that it's very old school in terms of how it shoots and edits action sequences. It's sort of like of a last dying breed, where it's just very classically made. And Spielberg at that time was coming off of a huge flop with 1941 and felt he had something to prove, and he proved it with this one.
I rewatched it again this week just because I'm like, it's Raiders. I got to watch it again.
Yeah.
I have to see if it holds up, and it absolutely does. It still looks so good. Like, I don't know how this movie looks so good from 1981 that it could be made today.
It's wildly entertaining. I mean, it's just, and it's made with such energy and propulsion. Like, it does not stop. It hits the ground running. And we were talking about Diane Keaton in Reds, and Raiders of the Lost Ark has a wonderful female character right at its center.
Yep, Karen Allen. She's really good.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the great Hollywood casting miracles of all time was that Tom Selleck had just gotten Magnum PI and could not do this film, because I love Tom Selleck, but Harrison Ford in this role, I mean, there's really nobody like him anymore. That kind of person who can carry an action film with grit and intelligence in equal parts. So much of the success of this movie comes from the fact that that character is so interesting and so much somebody who you want to spend time with. And you don't see that a lot in films like that today.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is an excellent transition point, because Josh Parham asked us, would you have nominated Harrison Ford for Best Actor?
Oh, well, that means I got to take, it's a hard, you look at, I would have, if I could have had an extra spot.
In theory, you would. Yes.
Yeah, in theory, I would. It's hard to take out one of these guys because they're all so good. The other ones were, the other one we didn't mention was Paul Newman in Absence of Malice. I guess that, you could have theoretically put Ford in there over him, or maybe even Warren Beatty.
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, it's just hard to pick which one you take out. But they, I mean, Harrison Ford had this problem with, The Fugitive as well. I mean, he's fantastic in that movie. You just never, they never went for that kind of performance, but so much of those movies' successes came from his acting abilities.
Yeah.
To be able to make you feel sympathy and, for these characters.
Yeah. And we've talked about on the show, the only nomination he ever received was for Witness.
Yeah.
Which he is great in.
Yeah.
But I have been watching Harrison Ford films from like the 90s, the 80s. A lot of them had Oscar traction. Some of them were nominated for Best Picture, like The Fugitive, Witness, even Working Girl. And he is so so good in just this. He has this weird alchemy that he brings to every single role that is funny and goofy and still very rugged and masculine in his own way, but not in a like a oppressive, toxic masculinity sort of way.
Yeah, exactly.
That somehow works so well. And you just like always want to watch him. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I have very similar feelings to him.
Yeah.
I think he's so underrated as an actor. It's not, people think it's easy to do what he does.
Yeah.
It's not. If it was easy, you'd see more people doing it.
Yeah, there are not many people like him.
Yeah.
Or were not. I mean, he's still doing a lot of movies, but
right.
they're not exactly the same caliber that
the kinds of, and I think that, you know, you look at the great Spielberg movies of this era, things like Raiders and Jaws,
E.T.
Yeah, what makes them great aren't just the spectacle; it's the characters. You know, like you feel a tremendous amount of empathy, and there's dimensionality to them. There's humor and wit. You know, these are fully formed individuals who are at the center of these spectacular events. And that's what is sorely missing from so many blockbusters.
Yeah, that exact argument is exactly what we talked about with E.T. last episode. So it's so crazy that he was able to make these two films back to back.
Yeah.
That really encapsulated that sense of spectacle and story and characterization, and just make these crowd-pleasing blockbusters that still don't feel like they're dumbing down to their audience.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and you don't see a lot of that today.
Not at all. Yeah. Not at all. Once in a while, but
yeah. Well, people ask all the time. That's like, I mean, with this whole, just to continue talking about this year, with the best popular movie category. You know, I mean, you hear people all the time say, well, why can't they nominate blockbusters? Those movies should be eligible too. It's like, well, they do, but they have to be good.
They do when they're good. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really simple.
That's all there is to it. It's like, if they were better films, then you wouldn't have this problem.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
We did get one other question that some people already answered to this question on Twitter, but we're going to just talk about it anyway. Right. It's from San Diego Cinerama, who said, how does the score for Chariots of Fire win over the score for Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Well, you know, that score for Chariots of Fire, it was probably the most memorable thing about it, to be honest. And obviously I wasn't alive for this, but from what I understand, it was a Billboard top 40 hit. It was like playing on the radio.
And that's an instrumental.
Yeah. And in commercials and things like that. And people had the album, you know? So when a score is that iconic, and the fact that, like, it's not a bad score, it just is weird for the movie, you know? Like Vangelis, the very next year he works on Blade Runner, which is a beautiful score, and it fits the content of that movie and the style of that movie. It's so iconic that when they did the sequel, they wanted to reference that work and build upon it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it was the only really memorable thing about the movie. That's the only the only thing I can remember about that movie. And I just watched it again, you know, not too long ago. It's just the scene of them running in slow motion on the beach, and you know, the da 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 da.
Thank you for that interpretation.
Well, I didn't have it on. I didn't want to, didn't have it on Spotify or anything. So
yeah. Well, I will say, I'm fine with Chariots of Fire winning Best Original Score.
Yeah.
I think Raiders of the Lost Ark obviously has a very memorable score of its own that people know. Again, from John Williams, who was a master. But, you know, that Chariots of Fire score became like kind of a phenomenon, and that very rarely even happens with film scores.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it was undeniable. And it was part of why people loved the movie, I think, is just like how that music made them feel so pumped up, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
So that's a simple explanation for that. And yeah, they're both great, but Come on.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our should have been a contender segment.
Yes.
This is other movies nominated for Oscars this year, or just any old movie that came out in 1981. So, Zach, did you have a few you wanted to mention here?
I did, yeah. I actually, when you were talking about best original score, it reminded me of a movie that got about 8 Oscar nominations this year and was not a Best Picture nominee. That's Ragtime, which had a score by Randy Newman. For our musical theater fans in the audience, this is not the 1998 Tony-winning musical version. This is this is an adaptation of the E.L. Doctorow book, and it focuses so intently on the oh my God, I'm blanking on the character's name. It was the guy whose the car gets destroyed. Howard E. Rollins Jr., his character. I was in a production of this when I was at
Cole
Walker Jr.
Cole
Yeah.
House Walker.
Yeah. Oh my God. It
Totally
focuses very intently on his story. And, I think that we're talking about this a lot this year with Green Book. Who has the right to tell stories about the Black experience? And, this is a film that was directed by Milos Forman, based on a book written by E.L. Doctorow. But I think that they do a very good job of presenting of not softening or dumbing down the experience of Cole House Walker. You really do get a sense of the discrimination and bigotry that he had to face. And, it doesn't try to exonerate the white characters in there at all. If anything, the family is made to, they don't look very good from the way that they treat him and the way that they treat Sarah. So I think that, it's one of the best films that I've ever seen about racism in this country.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to get in this question here because I think we might be onto something as far as answering this particular question from Ed Stevens, who said, why do you think Ragtime failed to get into for Best Picture or Director when voters gave it 8 nominations? And I think you might be onto something as far as how it is confrontational a bit more so than some voters might be comfortable with.
Yeah, and it did get in. Foreman was nominated at the Golden Globes for directing, and so it wasn't as if the movie was not in the conversation. But I think, it is hard. You see these movies like Do the Right Thing, for instance, and today with Black Klansman, which is not doing well. Well, hopefully it'll do better. This will be an evergreen comment.
Meanwhile, it wins Best Picture in a few months.
I know, right? It's a much tougher pill to swallow. Even though Ragtime is a movie that takes place in the past, it says we haven't solved anything. This is still happening, and that's a really bitter pill to swallow, especially if you are a white person.
Yeah. And even if you're a white liberal who wants to feel good about the fact that we've evolved so much from the past, and they're like, we can just laugh at those crazy racists in the past. Aren't we great now? But
give ourselves a pat on the back. Yeah.
Right. But really, have we changed that much?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it's really a shame. And the movie did not win any of its 8 Oscars.
Oh, I think you're right. Wow. Yeah. That's 0 for 8 that's rough. That is rough.
Yeah. And I think, it's got a beautiful score by Randy Newman. It's such a massive production and such an elegant production. It should have won at least something, some costumes. For God's sake, yeah. And Howard E. Rollins Jr. I think he's at the heart of why the film works so well, because he brings such I don't want to use the word dignity, but it's sort of, you feel for his plight. He is so strong, and you understand. He does such a good job of conveying the anger and the frustration and the indignation that this character has, having to continuously kowtow to white characters. And I think that's probably that's there is an anger there. And, you look at examples of things like, Green Book from this year, where the black character is constantly saying, no, we don't fight back. We use our words and our intellects. And Ragtime is, no, we are going to bomb the city. We are going to be, it's like Trump's America's worst nightmare, militant black people standing up for themselves and taking up arms against the police. It's just like,
Yep.
It's their worst nightmare come to life. And I think that is, it's I don't even know the word to describe it. It's shocking to see in American movies. It's a quality that like Spike Lee films have.
Yeah, that's you did a very good job of summing all of that up, because I think it's very much worth watching all these years later. And so I would imagine it was like 6th place in this race as far as Best Picture, but I can't really think of anything else that would have come close.
Yeah.
Especially with all those nominations. So,
and
I was also reading an Inside Oscar about Howard E. Rollins Jr. and how it's just so sad, because he just talks about how like even after getting an Oscar nomination, the roles just didn't come.
Yeah. It's telling about how the ways in which black performers have to portray themselves on film.
Mm-hmm.
It's really telling about especially at that time, the kind of dignity is a loaded word when you'd always hear Sidney Poitier described that way, very dignified, right? And it's basically just like, just be polite to us and we'll give you whatever you want,
Mm-hmm.
But that still happens today, unfortunately.
That's absolutely right. It's a timely film, believe it or not. So,
and I wish more people would watch it too. It's beautifully made and really powerful, and made with a lot of subtlety too. Like Milos Forman, and for Milos Forman during this period, he was coming off of an Oscar win for Cuckoo's Nest. He had an Oscar win coming with Amadeus. Like,
this is like right in the middle.
He was on a roll of making these like, really epic visions of the world that we live in, not just America, but
it's true.
Yeah.
So there you go. I highly recommend. Check it out.
Yeah.
I think it's on Amazon Prime, actually.
Oh, great. Well, then I'm going to watch it.
Yeah, there you go.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about The French Lieutenant's Woman.
Yeah, I love that movie.
Because that is a good Meryl Streep performance. I know she says she doesn't love that performance. She actually is quoted in interviews saying it's one of her least favorite. But she has 2 performances in the film because of the concept. I don't know if people are familiar with The French Lieutenant's Woman. It's based on a book. It's like this dual narrative thing that's happening, where we have literally her playing the French Lieutenant's Woman, Sarah Woodruff, in older times, and she's having this affair with this guy. She's kind of this mysterious, enigmatic person. Meanwhile, we see that Meryl Streep is an actress in modern times playing in a movie that is The French Lieutenant's Woman. So it's like these dual performances. We also have Jeremy Irons as her counterpart. And it's just a really fascinating, cool concept more than anything. I think I respect like the way that it's crafted more than I do like the emotional heft of it, but I still think it's powerful in the sort of dichotomies that it presents.
I just watched that movie for the first time recently. I think this year actually, because it came out on Criterion. I picked up a Blu-ray of it, and I think that it's based on this book that it's very different, a very different experience reading the book than it is from watching the movie. And you can understand why they did it the way they did it, because the book kind of exists in this sort of detached universe, where it's like you're meant to feel a certain emotional distance and an emotional irony for what's going on. And so I think it's really brilliant what Harold Pinter and Carol Rice, the director, did in, making it, on the one hand, a love story, in the traditional sense, but on the other hand, you've got like we're making this is a movie about making a movie about this romance, and so it does set up this kind of, in that way, it sets up an emotional distance for the audience. Like you're always kind of observing what's going on.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I think we give Meryl a lot of crap for getting nominated year after year after year, but this is one of those performances. I'm sorry that she doesn't like it as much, but I think you could have made a legitimate case for her winning the Oscar for this role.
Yeah, I mean, she wins the Golden Globe for drama over Katharine Hepburn. I might add.
I'm sure that a lot of people in that time were trying to give her a lead actress Oscar, and it would have been a deserved win. The film has so much to say about the way that we treat women in society. And it makes us, much like Ragtime, maybe this is a reason why, both of these movies, because that got 5 nominations, you would think that it would be.
And 0 wins.
It kind of, as a man, it makes you feel bad about, the ways in which you treat women.
Yeah. And I think, especially in her French Lieutenant woman character, I think is so fascinating and enigmatic, and also very ahead of her time in a way that's very striking to watch. And it's a very memorable performance from her. So, and it's also just the way that it's visually shot is so stunning.
Yeah. Who shot that movie? I can't remember. It was,
well, not nominated for cinematography. I can at least say that.
It was some big name. I'm going to look that up right now because it's going to kill me. Freddie Francis. Yeah. Multiple Oscar winner, Freddie Francis. So, yeah, I mean, it's just an A-class production. That movie is like a fine glass of wine.
Yes.
That's how I would describe it.
Very good.
Another movie that came out this year, I don't know how close it was to getting a Best Picture nomination. It did get a screenplay bid, but I think it's a vastly underrated film from this period. That's Prince of the City by Sidney Lumet. The last time he was ever in the Oscar race was on your last week's podcast for
The
Verdict, which is another one of my favorite movies.
So good.
This one, Prince of the City, is like Sidney Lumet, what he's known for. It's like a New York street movie, police procedural, and it's viewed on an epic scale too. It's all about this cop who's witnessing corruption all around him, and he's deciding whether or not he's going to rat them out. A performance that I think should have been nominated for supporting actor was Jerry Orbach as one of his fellow detectives. Kind of the polar opposite of the character he played on Law and Order. Sort of a dirty cop. I really feel like it's a shame that Lumet went to his grave without ever winning an Oscar, and I think it's also a shame that he was not nominated for directing for this film. I mean, he got the Golden Globe bid. I think that he and Milos Forman should have been in there over Hugh Hudson. I mean, without question.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that from the fact that the film was not recognized, I don't think anywhere else other than screenplay.
I'm trying to look. It seems like, that was it.
Yeah. So,
yep.
I'm guessing it just was one of those movies that, was in the conversation, but was not as well loved as it should have been, which is surprising because Lumet has gotten films in for picture and director. I think that probably, the theme of these films is that that gets snubbed is that they make you feel problematic. It's not an easy film to watch. It is like he does do the right thing in the end, but the way that Lumet portrays it, it's like you're supposed to be conflicted because he is ratting his fellow officers out. At the same time, though, it paints a really grim portrait of police corruption in our country, which is a theme that we see over and over again in real life. I just think it's a fantastic film that should have gotten more attention.
Well, you are continuing to set me up for these questions because we did get a question about Prince of the City, believe it or not.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, this is from Mark Lamb. Who said, while I think Fonda deserved the Oscar that year, sentiment or not, why was Treat Williams not nominated for Prince of the City. It was an acclaimed performance and got a Golden Globe nomination. The other nominees were mostly veterans, but think Paul Newman replaced Williams.
I don't know if Paul Newman necessarily replaced Williams. I think that it was just one of those things where, because, I mean, he was sort of a newcomer to films at that point, right? I mean, he was sort of, I think it was probably like we see this a lot where they figure, all right, we'll get you next time, sort of thing.
And then it never happened.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm looking at the Golden Globe nominations for Prince of the City, and they really liked it. I mean, they got a Best Picture nomination, and, so I don't know. I don't know what happened there. I really don't. I guess it's just sort of a bitter pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Yep. That is the theme.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about a movie that you could say it's good, you could say it's bad. Regardless, it's very noteworthy. And that movie is Mommy Dearest.
Oh my God. Oh, I love Mommy Dearest. I love Mommy Dearest for all the reasons you said.
You cannot go in this year without talking about Mommy Dearest.
Talk about an actress. You know what? We didn't bring her up when we brought up our actress. Who would have been in sixth place? She got some kind of nomination, right? It was
a Razzie.
Yeah, that's like,
she got that precursor.
Oh God, I love Mommy Dearest.
It is just the most. It is the most movie. It is just the most. It is the kitchen sink and everything that came with it. And it has one mode, and it just plays that mode for 2 hours.
Yep.
And it is a blast, and also very uncomfortable, depending on the mood you're in. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I remember I have the DVD of Mommy Dearest with a John Waters commentary on it, where he makes an argument for, he says, aside from a few scenes, I don't think this is a bad movie. And there are moments in it where you can kind of see how it could have worked. It's just there's so many moments of the fire hangers, and it's a really good example of how just going slightly too much can basically sink your film. I mean, that was a prestige project. Like,
that was its ambition.
She must have thought she was going to win an Oscar for that, honestly.
You are continuously setting up these questions because Andrew Carden, our good friend Andrew Carden, tweeted, Faye Dunaway was said to be shocked that she didn't earn a Best Actress nomination for Mommy Dearest. Did she deserve one?
Maybe over Marsha Mason. Sure. I mean, I'll give her this. She goes for it. I mean, she really goes for it. And it's almost this kind of like kabuki theater performance. I remember it,
It's very memorable.
Yeah, I mean, with the eyebrows.
You can't forget
it. It's man. I want to watch this again now. It's been a while because it is so out there.
So it basically sweeps the Razzies.
Yeah.
It is like the big Razzie film from this year, including Faye Dunaway, best pick or worst picture in this case. Supporting actor Steve Forrest, supporting actress Diane Scarwood, worst screenplay. It's just
I miss when the Razzies would go for like the memorably bad movies. Now it's just kind of like 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, and the Emoji Movie.
Like
how brave of you to say the Emoji Movie is bad.
But like the prestige, this was a prestige drama. The guy who directed this movie was Frank Perry, Oscar-nominated director of David and Lisa. It was produced by Frank Yablans, who was, one of the head honchos at Paramount while Robert Evans was there. This was meant to be an Academy Award contender. And I'll bet you if we were doing Gold Derby back in 1981, we would have had it ranked up in our prediction center before we saw the movie. I bet you Faye Dunaway would have been in like first place to win Best Actress for this.
Yep. Like such a juicy role.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. But yeah, I miss that. I wish that the Razzies did went for those kinds of things more.
Well, they kind of sort of did that last year with Jennifer Lawrence and Mother.
Oh, that's true. Although
And then,
that wasn't a bad movie,
no, it wasn't.
depending
It's
on who you talk to.
criminally misunderstood, but
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
whole other discussion. I say, you know what? Faye Dunaway gave it her all.
Mhm.
It's a very haunting performance, I must
Yeah.
say. And so, why not a nomination? I
Yeah.
will say, I was just looking up other like precursors outside of the Razzies that it was nominated for, and like she was nominated for the National Society of Film Critics, the
That's
New York Film Critics, you know. So it wasn't like just totally bad all the way. So
That's what it was. That's what it was. Yeah, I knew she had shown up at some of those places.
yeah.
Well, actually, I mean, that kind of said, I talked about this movie a little bit before with Best Actress, but I did want to reiterate what a great movie Body Heat is.
Hmm.
I know that you've talked about Lawrence Kasdan a lot on this podcast recently because this was his great decade. But this movie, you know, it's such an effective film noir, so sexy, and like you feel the heat.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. I mean, just the visual style of the movie really makes you feel the temperature, to put it mildly. And like Kathleen Turner has never been more alluring in her entire cinematic life. And it's not just the fact that she's not just a sex object in the film. You know, she is that classic kind of Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity, Black Widow, noir villainous. Like you can understand how William Hurt would kill a man for her.
Exactly.
And a great supporting performance by Ted Danson. Like this was pre-Cheers when he was primarily. There's these wonderful moments where like he plays William Hurt's best friend, and he kind of knows that his friend is guilty, or his friend is at least involved in this. And there's these wonderful kinds of cat and mouse games where it's like on the one hand he really likes the guy, on the other he really wants to catch him for murder. And Hurt, you know, is like eluding him. You know, he knows too that he's on to him. So it's just such a wonderful film. It got zero Oscar consideration. He did get a Writers Guild nomination for it. She got that defunct that Golden Globe bid that tripped me up. I think she got that at the BAFTAs too, maybe, but certainly she should have been in the actress conversation. It's shocking she wasn't.
Yeah, certainly a very memorable debut. So
you'd think that as horny as these Oscar voters are, I mean, you know, like it's so typical of them too to go for like
they would love this kind of shit. You know?
Yeah, the hot young thing, you know, like over and over again. So it's kind of shocking they didn't go for her.
Yeah. Well, I got on the other end of the spectrum, I guess. I have My Dinner with Andre.
another sexy movie
with international sex symbols Wallace Shawn.
That's another.
So, yeah, it's just literally two people having a conversation in a restaurant. We watched this in my film studies class that I often reference on this podcast. Most of the class was sleeping by the end of it, and I was just sitting in the corner like riveted.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it in a while, but I just remember just finding this concept to be so like daring to just make it into a feature film.
We should mention, I mean, this was also directed by Louis Malle,
right?
Who
quite a year.
Yeah, throughout his career, he really did try new things. I was actually just thinking about this movie the other day because I was the three of them reunited years later for this movie called Vanya on 42nd Street, which is all just like a rehearsal piece. Uncle Vanya in a bare bones theater with Wallace Shawn as Uncle Vanya, and Andre Gregory is directing it. And, you know, I mean, again, it's the most implausible concept for a movie, and yet it's so well crafted, and you're almost riveted by the fact by how uncinematic it is.
Exactly.
You know, like
that's how I felt.
Yeah, it demands a lot of you. My Dinner with Andre, but it really, I think that film and Vanya as well, they really get at the heart of what drama is, which is storytelling.
Yep.
You know,
And it's as simple as two people having a conversation, and
Yeah.
it could just be it can be the cinematic experience. So
I will say though, my favorite thing about My Dinner with Andre is in oh my God, Waiting for Guffman, where he has his his My Dinner with Andre action figures.
yes, that is me.
Well, actually, going on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, then.
Okay, we're just going all the way.
Yeah. This movie got zero Oscar attention as well. This was the year that Michael Mann made Thief.
Oh, right.
That was his debut. I mean, it is one of the best of the like 80s thrillers that there is. I mean, there's Jimmy Caan plays a thief.
How about that?
Yeah. And I mean, there's this, it's full on like Michael Mann style. You know, you can see the seeds of Heat and Collateral and even The Insider as well.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, even back then, he had such a visual eye, you know, he really was one of the big ones. You know, I mean, in this kind of era of that and Manhunter and Mohicans, you know, like he just had one fantastic film after another, except for I guess The Keep, but you know, so I think that if you know, Jimmy Caan had no shot in the world of getting a Best Actor nomination for this film because it is such a genre picture. But it's you know, it's the kind of thing that you know, it takes its time to unfurl, and it involves you in what's going on, and it involves you in the inner life of this character. And so when the action does happen, you are riveted by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it could have been a movie that would be more appreciated in future decades.
Yeah.
So it's ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Let me see if I had any other films. I think we went through most of the big ones, but well, actually, we had just a question here from Gordon at Mark Wahlberg.
Okay.
Who said, going back to the Razzies, James Coco was nominated for both an Oscar and a Razzie for his performance in Only When I Laugh. Which did he deserve more?
Oh, the Razzie by far. Yeah, I mean, you know what? It's not his fault. That whole movie is just close to unwatchable. That got 3 acting nominations too, which is amazing. The other one we didn't talk about was who's the woman in that movie? It's Joan Hackett. That's
Joan Hackett. Yeah.
Joan Hackett. I don't understand. Neil Simon had this thing where he would, you know, try to do drama from time to time, and it was just unbearable. Rest in peace to the great man. His comedies were, you know, revolutionary. His dramas, not so much. And he had this weird thing where he would just write movies for his wife to appear in, Marcia Mason at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say Razzie. And I mean, in each of those cases, I think they took away a much more deserving spot from.
Probably. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting that it was just a few episodes ago when we were talking about Amy Irving and Yentl.
Yeah.
Who also got an Oscar and a Razzie nomination.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think for that, I think she deserved an Oscar more than a Razzie.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's been a couple of, I think that there's, you know, sometimes there can be sort of a backlash against a certain star. You know, maybe they see an opportunity to dig one in at them.
Yeah.
But I think in this case, it's such an odd thing that I guess Only When I Laugh, because Only When I Laugh is this weird movie about alcoholism, or, you know, and it views that problem in a way that is such an easy fix, that I guess it's you know, it's a feel-good movie about addiction, and those are never good, but they're catnip for Oscar voters because so many of them are addicts themselves and would like to think that one day they too can kick this habit and
See, there's hope.
and get an Oscar nomination for it as well.
Yeah.
It's,
But yeah, I mean, that's I guess back to your argument. It is an inspired kind of Razzie nomination
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I think I didn't know if you didn't know if you had a movie you wanted to bring up or not, because it kind of transitioned into something I wanted to talk about as well.
Well, I was just going to bring up The Fox and the Hound.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, okay.
One of the more underappreciated Disney animated films. The 80s were not the most beloved of Disney eras.
No, they were not.
Kind of a valley before the big rise with Little Mermaid. But it's a cute little movie about friendship. What can you say? I just wanted to throw it in there because I think it's underappreciated.
I enjoyed that movie. Yeah. It's I think it's good to bring that up because as we get into these earlier years, there is no best animated feature Oscars, so sometimes these films can get lost in the shuffle.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean that was a childhood favorite of mine. You and I are from the same generation, so I remember
Yeah.
I have fond memories of that one as well. I'm glad
Absolutely.
you brought that up.
Yeah.
On the opposite end of the spectrum, one person
Here
who
we go.
who could have taken that nomination away from James Coco was John Hurd in Cutter's Way.
Have not seen it.
Well, a lot of people have not, but it's found a second life. I actually I discovered it on Blu-ray from Twilight Time, one of those we're going to put out movies that you may have heard of, but you definitely should check them out. It's another one of those last remnants of the 1970s. It has a lot in common with movies like Night Moves. It's all about basically Jeff Bridges plays this guy who sees a man dumping a body, and he becomes fixated on this one individual who he's like, I'm certain that this person did it. And his friend, played by John Hurd, is a wounded Vietnam veteran, and I mean he's got a cane, and he's missing an eye and all this stuff. And for him, it's trapping this guy and getting him to confess to the murder is like a last act of redemption for him.
Cool.
And it's just one of those really great, gritty. It was shot by Jordan Cronenweth. Yeah, I was getting confused there with the Cronenweth names. The one who did Blade Runner, right? So it was an early film for him, and so it's got this kind of noirish look to it, it's just it's something that more people should check out. It's very hard to watch. It's got a very bleak, unconventional finale, but I think for people who seek it out, it's surprisingly effective.
Sounds very interesting.
It got a Writers Guild nomination from. So I mean, it wasn't like it just kind of came and went, but
it registered.
Yeah, I just think it was not, again, with Reagan coming into the White House. I don't think people were ready to, be reminded of how sad the world can be at times.
Yeah. Just one other question I got from Ewan Daly, saying, can you guys talk about Pennies from Heaven?
Yes.
And how it has become a more beloved film in the decade since 1981. Also, this is the first time you guys will talk about Hepburn, so I'm thrilled.
I love Pennies from Heaven. I think that, that, again, is a movie that's really hard to watch. It's this kind of
sensing a theme. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's this collision course between old Hollywood movie musicals and new age cynicism. And, it kind of, in combining those two things, it's this really interesting contrast between what was going on in the Great Depression and how despondent and full of despair people were, and how the movies that they were going to at that time were filled with hope and glitz and glamour. I think that, it just was not something that people were wanting to go and see in droves. So,
ironically, yeah.
But if there'd been a happy ending, they probably would have showered that movie with Oscars. It would have been like,
Sadly true. Yeah.
yeah. But
Well, I just wanted to quickly do the aside about Hepburn that he concluded here. I just wanted to note that this is a good transition point this year because I've been talking a lot about Meryl Streep performances and all of the movies she was nominated for. And now we're at this point where the two of them have converged.
right?
And Meryl Streep is nominated alongside Katharine Hepburn. And now I'm going to talk about pretty much for the remainder of this show, Katharine Hepburn and her various nominated and non-nominated performances. So I just wanted to make note of that. So I'm very excited to jump into more Hepburn.
That is a really beautiful it's like this cross section there, you know, like, you know, the blending of worlds.
Yes, the old and the new once again.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've pretty much exhausted 81.
Well, there's
Arthur.
Yeah, there's Arthur. I think that the significant movie, though, that, you know, it was a turning point for Hollywood. I guess you could technically talk about this movie next week because it technically came out in 80, but it was eligible for Oscars in 81, was Heaven's Gate.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess we should throw that one in there because it did pretty much change the course of Hollywood forever.
Yeah.
You know,
for better or for worse.
Yeah. But Arthur is delightful as well.
Yeah, and John Gielgud
wins an
Oscar for this.
He was in Chariots of Fire, by the way, and he's the best thing about it because he's the only one who looks down on the snootiness of the whole thing.
Right.
You know, which is kind of what he does in Arthur too, as his butler, you know. Yeah, this was like the attack of the geriatrics at the Oscars.
It really was.
When Maureen Stapleton is your young ingenue.
Yeah. And that's what I was reading also in Inside Oscar is that like this is skews very old compared to what they usually do. So
yeah,
very interesting. Okay, so when we come back, we will be giving our verdict as to whether Chariots of Fire deserve that Best Picture win or if Reds deserved it more.
These, then, are the 5 nominations for the Best Motion Picture of 1981. Atlantic City. It's an international cinema, corporation productions, and it's Paramount. Dennis Herrick and John Kemeny production. They're producers. The next is Chariots of Fire, Enigma Production Limited, the Ladd Company Warner Brothers, David Putnam, producer. On Golden Pond and ITC Films, IPC Films Production Universal, and Bruce Gilbert, producer. The next is Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's a Lucasfilm production of Paramount. Frank Marshall, producer. And the last, the 5th nominee, Reds, a JRS Productions Paramount. Warren Beatty, producer. Ladies and gentlemen, the winner is Chariots of Fire.
And we're back. So now I'll be delivering our verdict as to whether Chariots of Fire deserve that Best Picture win or if Reds should have taken it more. Zach, what do you say?
I think that Reds should have. It was, yeah, no question. It's not even a competition.
Yeah, I totally agree. Reds is the more ambitious, better, just overall.
Yeah.
just it has all these great technical elements to it. Such a visionary film, I think, much more so than Chariots of Fire. Totally agree on that.
Yeah.
Broadening it out to all the Best Picture nominees, do we still say Reds deserve to take this?
I think so. I mean, I think, as I said, my personal favorite would be Atlantic City. Um, but I think, and I think that a lot of people today would probably go with Raiders of the Lost Ark. And you can make an argument for like that being the seminal movie of 1981. But I think that Reds would have been a worthy representation of the year. I think that win would have aged pretty well because on the one hand you would have like the intellectual important pick, but also I think you would have picked a film that was edgy enough to edgy as edgy as being about communist in the early part of the 20th century can be. It would have been on a par with something like Lawrence of Arabia winning.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a tough call for me because I do really am I'm very drawn towards Raiders of the Lost Ark for other reasons and some similar reasons as far as the scope and ambition and influence. But I just feel like I still have to go with Reds on this one.
Yeah.
As the biggest achievement, so.
Yeah, I mean, I really wish year after year, I just wish that Oscar voters looked at the achievement of a film more than just whether or not they enjoyed it personally.
Yes.
And I enjoy Reds on a personal level. I can see how it's not as exciting as Chariots of Fire must have been to the people watching it at that time. But it's just, how do you ignore something like that? He spent like 14 years getting that movie made, and I mean, it's done on such an epic scale, and it has so much to say. It's not just about like the Bolsheviks, but it really does take a look at the world that we live in, and it holds up well, I think. So
I agree. Yeah. As far as opening it up to all the movies from 1981, do we still say Reds is the movie?
Well, then you got Mommy Dearest, so that's
tough.
I mean, looking at the, thinking about the movies that we talked about, I'd still say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to argue with that.
I know. This is just like the same thing that I've said every single week now. That's just like, this movie deserved it between the two, and then between the five, and then actually all of them. So I have no changing answer, sadly.
I would say, it's like if you get down to like, anything but Chariots of Fire. This is literally what I look at when I look at this year. I think I would have been happy if Atlantic City won. I would have been happy if Raiders of the Lost Ark won. I would have been happy if On Golden Pond won. I think it reminds me a lot of the Crash year, where it was just like, it's not so much that it beat Brokeback Mountain as that it beat, 4 really good movies that hold up very well.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to share one last quote.
Oh, wonderful.
From Inside Oscar. That is very shady. So, strap in.
Is there any other kind? Yeah.
Right. Especially in the 80s. So much shade was being thrown. Okay. So this says, after the Oscar win for Chariots of Fire, David Putnam, the producer of Chariots of Fire, blasted Warren Beatty in print. Marilyn Beck claimed that Putnam was, quote, bitter that Hugh Hudson had lost Best Director to Warren Beatty, and quoted the British producer as saying, Hugh is without a doubt a better director than Warren is or ever will be. And so are Steven Spielberg and Louis Malle. He also asserted that Beatty's Oscar win was, quote, proof the Academy was acknowledging he could raise $50 million to make a picture.
Well, joke's on him, because it was just a few years later that Hugh Hudson was competing for a Razzie for that movie Revolution. You remember that? That was... yeah. I think Mr. Putnam wishes he could have taken that quote back. But
oh, yeah. So I like sharing those little shady quotes from Inside Oscar because people were not shy about just the competitiveness of the Oscars, just openly, like,
God, could you imagine somebody saying that now?
I
Just
know.
like about Tom Hooper or Michelle Hazanavicius, people who like won the Oscar over like stellar competition. Like,
Yep.
they would be saying that about Hugh Hudson. Just imagine if he had won. Like, he would have. I mean, he didn't have much of a career afterwards anyway. But just imagine if he had taken an Oscar away from Warren Beatty and Louis Malle and Steven Spielberg.
God.
Yeah.
So on that note, Reds has clearly, stood the test of time a lot more than Chariots of Fire has. So thank you, Zach.
You're welcome. I think we've talked for about as long as Reds was on.
I know.
So
maybe I'll put in an intermission in the middle. Just play some light, music.
Well, it's fun talking about these things. I can talk for hours and hours about Oscar years.
I very much appreciate it.
Of course.
So, tell the people where they can find you on the internet if they want to hear more from you.
On Twitter at Zach Laws. That's ZACHLAWS. You can, of course, also find me on Facebook and Instagram on that as well. And, of course, you can read all of my coverage of the award season, both current and past, on goldderby.com.
Very good. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The podcast is at Oscar Runner Up. The show is on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play. Rate, review, subscribe. And now I will leave it up to you listening at home to decide whether you think Chariots of Fire or Reds deserve Best Picture. And you can do that at my website at filmtrophies.com or email me at filmtrophies@gmail.com. So thank you once again, Zach.
You're welcome. Pleasure being on.
And I will bid you all adieu.